Welcome to Bruce Hurwitz Presents Meet the Experts. I'm your host, Bruce Hurwitz of Hurwitz Strategic Staffing. I hope you'll consider us for all your staffing, career counseling, and professional writing needs. You can find us on the web at hsstaffing.com. I am delighted to be joined today by Sean Parker. We're going to be discussing false allegations and wrongful convictions in the post-Me Too era. Meet the Experts is sponsored by P&K CPAs. P&K is a full-service accounting firm. They provide accounting and consulting services to businesses ranging from startups to small and mid-cap companies to nonprofits, as well as high-net-worth individuals. Contact them today for a free consultation at info@pk-cpas.com or call them at 973-882-8810. They will be happy to be of service. Sean, welcome to the show.
Hi, Bruce. Thanks very much. Great to be here.
It is my pleasure. Would you please take a moment or two and introduce yourself to our viewers?
Sure. I'm Sean Parker. I'm a writer, artist, and academic here in the UK. I'm the editor of False Allegations Watch, which is a part of Empowering the Innocent, which operates out of the University of Bristol and was started a couple of years ago by Dr. Michael Norton, who's the UK's main expert in miscarriage of justice sort of theory and literature. So I'm his editor. We work very closely, and we're happy to do public communications like this.
Well, and I'm delighted to have you. Now, the topic is in the post-Me Too era, which would seem to imply that the Me Too era is over with. Now, I thought that it was dead or dying because when then candidate Joe Biden was accused of rape, the woman who accused him was attacked. And that's sort of put an end to any serious consideration of Me Too, akin to when the improprieties, let's call them, of Black Lives Matter became public. Black Lives Matter disappeared. And of course, years ago, Occupy Wall Street didn't have much of a life. So what's the Me Too movement and why is it post?
Right. Well, here in England, we imported the Me Too movement, of course, in 2017-18, coming out of your country. And obviously, Mr. Harvey Weinstein, I don't want to teach anyone's grandmothers how to suck eggs. He's now doing a lot of time for his behaviors. And then, so the long tail of that was to affect all of the entertainment industry. And then that started to metastatize across all other institutions here as well as there. And it really has infiltrated the media and everything else in the sense of political feminism being very, very embedded now in all of our institutions. So it hasn't died at all. We've said the post-Me Too because in order to give it a timestamp to this era, you don't want to think of it. It's helpful to call it that because the original intensity of it in those years has gone. But there are many, many stories every day in the media, and they're intentionally every day in the media. And we like to cover this in False Allegations Watch because it goes down to affect the common man as well as the Bidens and the Trumps and the Russell Brands and characters like this.
Now, our innocent seems to imply that the men who are accused, I mean, it could be women as well, but the men who are accused of misbehavior are innocent. And so how is your organization treated in Britain?
Well, kind of, sort of until the verdict is called, everybody is innocent. So
you know that, I know that, but we both know that's not true.
Well, and
in
that's
the
what
in the court of public opinion.
yes, yes, the court of public opinion, which is totally illegitimate. So what we do with empowering the innocent, because Dr. Norton is a hardcore lawyer, not lawyer, but kind of criminologist, sociologist, we take things at their enlightenment core and we take things back to that because there's something to check against. With postmodern culture, there's nothing to check against. And the reason we're in the chaos that we're in now is because of this lack of rules and the way these things can be uh, the grey area of sexual assault and things like that, and the allegations of that can be expanded into everything, is a societal risk, and it's causing terrible division. So we're trying to pull things back to a place of reality, which are these Enlightenment values. So empowering the innocent just means people before verdict, and then even after verdict, many maintaining innocence out there because of mistakes that the courts have made, because of things like the courts of public opinion.
When someone is accused of doing something inappropriate, and they either haven't done it or they don't consider it at the reasonable, it used to be called the reasonable man, now it's the reasonable person standard. This is not sexual harassment. This is not inappropriate touching. But because the complaint has been filed, it has to be treated as though it's a real issue. It's a real problem. How do you advise people who are falsely or unjustly accused of inappropriate behavior to respond?
When it comes to the individuals themselves, I would say it's not personal, because it feels very personal to other people that we deal with and to people that we know who've gone through this. It's of course, it upends everybody, and it's the reason that it's used as a tool against powerful people. Is it's the easiest thing to weaponize, because we're talking about usually men who have internal drives that aren't a part of their public character, and all men have certain evolutionary pushes which are often ignored in these cultural discussions. So the advice would be, firstly, that it's not personal. It's usually sort of politically based, because increasingly, the traditional ideas of sexual assault and rape and things, which were very serious 20th century, strange, heavy crimes, allegations, which we'll both remember, have now been winnowed out into almost anything that looks like unsatisfactory sex. And this is happening more and more. And because it's being played out in the court of public media, to use your term, that has led to an absolute democratization of these allegations, which has started, it's not started with the Me Too, it started with the Title IX thing over the college campuses, and went through the Me Too, and now into what we have all over institutionally activist media. And that's anti-judicial. And so we have to at least call it out. And what we're heading towards is conflict resolution, not for more division. So empowering the innocent, we actually want a positive future, not the awful sectioning and sort of siloing of people that we've seen over the last couple of years.
I'm at a loss for words, because this is a weapon that people use in business, for example, in employment, to remove their competition. We'll do woman, man, they're up for the same job. The woman accuses the man of inappropriate behavior, the man's fired. Simple, I'm sure it happens more often than I can imagine, and as often as you know that it happens. What impact does this have, this mentality, on business?
That's the kind of question that comes to Dr. Norton quite a lot. Not that much to me, because I'm a bit more of a scribe, but he actually gets asked the businesses go to the wall left, right, and centre because of this. And of course, in the world of the arts and academia, which is my specific interest, it will attempt to destroy a person's artistic legacy or their impact, and it's meant to do that. The problem is, for the people who are weaponizing these things, is that the more the stories come out and the more the diverse the media reporting on it, the less intense it's seeming. So the impact, it's the law of diminishing returns. People, to be honest, aren't taking it as seriously anymore for precisely the reasons you just said. It's the replacement theory in the professions, where get rid of that insufficiently kind of risk-averse person, man, and put another person in his place, who's either a woman who's appropriately trained or a man who's appropriately trained into it, because it's not a gendered thing anymore. If you're into political feminism, you can be a man or a woman, and it doesn't really matter. It's much more about whether you want to go for the reality of the table in front of me or the imaginations of the 70s feminists who are apparently occupying all of the institutions. And that's what we're dedicated to calling out.
No. Sean, you still with me? I'm going to assume you are. I love it when this happens and the guest freezes. You're back. Good. Okay. So we've been talking men and women. And yes, there are only two genders. And no, men cannot get pregnant. But here we have in the States, I don't know if you've been blessed with this phenomenon yet, but transgenderism, where you've got men who participate in women's sports, you have men who want to use women's bathrooms, and that leads to all sorts of truly serious consequences. What relation, if any, does this have to Me Too?
Well, in the sense that the activists have got themselves into positions of power after the Equality Act being brought in here in 2010, lots of trans people, or basically trans people, have got themselves into positions of power over institutions all across the British states, as I'm sure, and they have in America. I know for a fact Canada too. In that they get in there.
That's all right. You can talk about Canada. I'm a Canadian.
Right. Excuse me. Absolutely.
Not a problem.
They've got themselves into these places in academia, in the media, in publishing, and because they've been taught by the gender studies courses over 30 years how to press the appropriate levers of power. So and they've used the Equality Act in order to call out any so-called hate speech. So that means you can't criticize it anymore, or you'll lose your job and possibly even go to prison, be prosecuted. The trans activists are equally toxic in this sort of subject as the political feminists. So they sometimes come up against each other, and that's often very highly publicized already. But the fact is, those two groups of people are weaponizing the Equality Act here, and to a certain degree, the Human Rights Act, to a very socially divisive degree. And the Me Too thing was quickly used in a way as to enable that political feminist action inside these institutions. So they are somewhat connected in these intersectional ways.
Here it's become a political issue for the presidential election, and the outcome of that election may determine the outcome of the power of the, for lack of a better term, the trans population, which I believe is less than 3% of the population. It's ridiculous. You are an artist. So let's change direction a bit. By the way, the painting behind you, is that yours?
It is indeed so, yes.
Okay. Um, how can art be used as a tool to empower the innocent?
Nice question. Dr. Norton, about 20 years ago, had the idea for innocence art, which is basically to channel the feelings and the impressions of the problems that we're talking about, the injustice happening, kind of sort of, into art itself, into song, into poem, into essay, which isn't too academic, which actually talks to the human spirit. So he's been putting together a lot of work from people who are affected by all these things. There's some very good documentaries out there. There's one by Patrick Graham, who's a documentary maker in Britain, called "Do We Believe You?", which is a wonderful half-an-hour documentary. Your viewers might be interested if they're interested in this subject of mine, which is a perfect piece of innocence art. And there's some paintings that I've done of Mr. John Lee Osborne, who's a prisoner maintaining innocence, and Mr. Julian Assange, which is obviously a very controversial one, both our countries, but he's maintaining innocence and on very interesting political grounds. So I'm not an activist for him, but I'm a presenter of the side of people who are claiming to be innocent. So that's the important little difference between do you support them or do you want to put their side? And the point is, I want to put their side. I wasn't there when these things happened. I just want to put the side of things that are ignored in the media. So that's the important nuance to recognize in what we do. And the innocence art is a extension of what we all do. But we're going to put on a exhibition at Bristol University at the start of next year. With a bit of luck, we're working on it right now.
So Power Innocent is not solely concerned with the Me Too movement.
No, not at all. It's a multi-based organization. Dr. Norton used to work very much in the area of IRA miscarriages of justice, if you remember that era of various Irish people, the Birmingham Six, the Guildford Four, people like this were kind of messed around by British police forces and spent years inside for things they hadn't done. So that was his sort of genesis of all this and how the justice system can be weaponized against people. That's now metastatized into identity politics beyond the Irish question, somewhat into everyday things like we're talking about with trans, the feminism, with stuff that people are very terrified to talk about, because and what we don't do at Empowering the Innocent is being terrified to talk about stuff, as you can tell. So we want to bring things to the fore without victimizing anybody, re-victimizing. You can barely use language anymore because of what they've done to it. And I'm, as a writer, very passionate about reclaiming language to saying what something actually is and not being afraid of using that language, not in any way to hurt people, because it's ridiculous. They proved that with the trans side when they start to call everything genocide because you're criticizing them. When they did that, it's like, well, you've lost most of the intelligent people of the world by saying that, and lots of trans people that I know and other people know, some of us have good friends who are, also hate all that stuff. So they don't want to be on the front of the culture wars. They never wanted that, and so we're fighting for them as much as anybody else. I'm coming away from your question a bit here, I think, but
that's okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Years ago, when I lived in Israel, for all intents and purposes, I ran a children's mental health center that was for children with interpersonal communication problems, and we utilized art therapy. Very simple example. A little girl had been run over by a truck. The truck didn't touch her. The driver knew exactly where she was. He knew exactly where his wheels, tires were, and he was able to ride over her without in any way physically touching her body. She stopped communicating with anyone but her immediate family and teacher. She was traumatized, obviously. 3 years later, she drew a picture of a little girl on the street, lying down, truck driving over. That was her breakthrough. It usually took up to 3 years. How can art be used to help the innocent overcome the trauma that they are experiencing because of, rightly or wrongly, what they honestly believe to have been the false charges brought against them and the unjustified punishment, whatever it may be, that they are facing?
What a wonderful little story that was. Thank you. Really beautiful. Art has this tendency to be the cipher for the true emotions for anybody, however good or bad the art is. It doesn't matter. It's people communicating in the only way that they can, or the way that they best prefer, be it a scrawled sketch of a little girl, or a documentary, or a song, or a painting. And the trauma that we go through when we've been falsely accused, wrongfully convicted, or we feel that we have as well. So those that might not, that's the problem with these sex allegations, is that things aren't what they seem, and they're very, very grey and very complex. Dr. Norton was helping a person who was accused, had been convicted years ago, and he and his wife's house, and he was sitting in the living room, and he saw some huge kind of paintings, perhaps like this, but even bigger, on the wall, of animals, and the animals appeared to be in some way representative of the person that he wanted to be, which is free. So apparently he did these paintings when he was inside, and he came out, and these wild animals were there, and they were speaking very, very loudly to Michael, and that he kept that idea of the only way a person can communicate is by this, and the power that has, and the difference between the prison art that we might be used to, which is often done in the pages of Inside Time, which is a very good newspaper here, but the prisoner art in there is all about redemption and change and things like that. And the thing about maintaining innocence is that the person doesn't actually need or want to change. That's a state-imposed theory, and it's like either you change or you're not doing your sentence properly, and then so you're stuck there forever. And that's rather a challenge to the person maintaining innocence. So art has to navigate its way through all this with the words as best they can. Otherwise, like to Franz Kafka's novel, The Trial is probably the foremost exemplar of innocence art, I would say, where you never even know whether he's guilty or innocent. He's just going through this bureaucratic process of nightmarishness. And that's why it's such a wonderful novel, just the ambiguity of all that.
A lot of people have difficulty, even with a close friend, when they're going through something tragic. What do you say to someone whose parent or worse, child has died? You don't know what the right thing is, and you're afraid you're going to say the wrong thing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's pretty much the same thing with someone who believes they've been falsely accused of a crime. How should
Indeed.
friends relate to them? How should they approach them?
Wow, that's such a deep question, and a very, very good one. And going back into my past as a Samaritan's counselor for this one, and that of course, death is much more absolute. And the thing about being falsely accused is that there is always a hope in a positive person that this is all going to be okay. So you do try and encourage them, and the solicitors try to encourage them too, to say things like, this will never go anywhere. But essentially, the solicitors are paid professionals. So I think you have to handle the individual person on their degree of resilience. So if you think the person's going to be resilient, then you correspond to that by telling them the appropriate degree of truth. If they can handle the fact that you know what the law's like, this might not be good for you, as a person might tell Mr. Trump, for example, because there's nothing he hasn't seen. So that would be a very different way of handling the little girl you mentioned, of how to tell her. I don't know where you go with the falsely accused on that, but if a person's never been through that before, then you just you'd have to be very sensitive. And when it's people's children, when it's the mothers of the accused, I call them, who are absolutely legion now. The mothers, the sisters, the girlfriends of the accused are everywhere, and it's going to be the end of Me Too before in the next few years is these women, because they are coming out furious about what's being done to their sons and their brothers. So with them, I also have to use the it's not personal. It's just being done as a kind of as a target kind of razor, though it feels so personal. It's meant to be like that. But what they're doing to it, what the state is doing to these allegations, is making them deliberately impersonal. And so you have to communicate that to the person that's complaining to you.
But you don't want them to get the impression that everything's going to be all right, because you don't know that everything's going to be all right. And if it's not all right in the end, then they're not prepared.
That's right. That's right. And that's why the conversation like we're having at the moment is the best way, the honest one, which goes like he might have done it, he might have not. And we're saying he because of the mass stats in that direction. And if and just to keep it as honest as you possibly can, and to ask them every angle about how it is. So if they had been in that position, what would they think about themselves, and then what would they think about that person as well? So keeping it personal onto that person's own circumstances, and also saying, however, it probably isn't personal, is probably the most therapeutic way to get through this, because everyone personalizes this stuff so much because of what the media does, basically. So we have to unravel kind of, you have to protect ourselves against the bullying of the media, basically.
Final question. And I'm going to now share your contact information. So bear with me 1 second. Is there anything that I did not ask you that you wish I had asked you? And if I had asked you, what would you have said?
No, it's very thorough, Bruce. It's great. That's the contact stuff there. If anybody wants to give some innocence art, we'd love to look at that for either display or for sharing. Empowering the Innocent website, which is there. They can send it. If they go there, they'll get the address. But it's also empowering the empower innocent at gmail.com. That email will get to me or Dr. Michael, and we will happily look at their story, which we can publish on False Allegations Watch. I'll edit it, or the art. We'll both look at it together, and it might even get into that exhibition. We're trying to help people feel better, and also to communicate, and also ultimately to change how these things are done.
Well, Sean, I thank you profusely for coming on. You're doing very important work, and it was an honor to interview you.
Thank you so much. It's been a fascinating half an hour. Really nice. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Thank you for watching. And as always, please stay focused on success.